Oh man, Warhammer's so cool. Got a really cool matchup for you guys today. Classic Bretonnia versus Beastmen. Although we are out here in the desert looking to do some crusading, Lewin managed to catch Morgur's horde out in the desert here by these big old pyramids. So let's take a look at the builds here. This replay from Rinzler. He's coming in hot with King Lewin here with some Grail Knights and Pegasus Knights. Knights Errant. Nice mix of cavalry here. Yeah, looks like the one Pegasus, maybe 2 Grails, 4 Errants. Quite a bit. 3 Errants, something like that. A bunch of Spearmen at Arms here. Peasant mob columns up front. On the opposite side here, plenty of infantry as well for the Beastmen. 3 Pestigors in the center. You've got Blackhorns, Ravagers, and Zangors, as well as Ungor Spearman herds. Centigors are throwing axes as well. Some Ungor Raiders here. Brave Shaman Lore of Wild. Very, very good choice. Morgur the Shadow Gave also going to provide a little bit of mass for this build, which it is lacking somewhat, but let's see. Spirit Essence of Chaos and Stave of Ruinous Corruption, of course, can bring 2 spawns. One on demand, one will insta-kill an enemy unit at low health. Very nice. Centigors with throwing axes. Here, a couple of them, they're going to provide the mobility, and looks like, yeah, Destroyers of Drakwald. Not sure what they're doing back there, but they're back there. Let's get things rolling. And Rinzler here has the opportunity to just charge straight in the face because Beastmen players put all their anti-large out here on the flanks to kind of support cavalry engagements. It does mean you could technically actually just face charge these Pestigors. Own cavalry would take a little bit of counter charge damage in return, but I mean, for something like a Grail Knight, they're really not going to care too much. They'd probably be able to just plow through these Pestigors, no problem. But let's see how things develop. We got an engagement already coming across this flank here. Has the Spearmen and Peasants kind of blunder into each other. Blackhorns Ravagers, of course, will do quite well, feasting some value here. Ungor Raiders also firing a few shots in. Shields and the armor of the Knights will help somewhat, but the Knights Errant definitely not doing too good in that engagement. Lewin and the Pegasus Knights pressuring the Centigors. The Pegasus Knights, of course, with their blazing fast speed flying through the sky, will be a great tool for pursuing these skirmish cavalry. And the Grail Knights also in the back line starting to shut down those ranged units. So a nice little compromise of that position here. Beastmen trading very well on other fronts here, as Centigors and Ungor Raiders. Just a great combination in general. The Centigors getting involved in melee a little bit here, but also plenty of throwing axes still to throw. Got a little bit of something there. Not sure what effect that is, but oh, that's the Pestigors effect. That's right, slowing nearby units when they rout. That allows these units to chase, get some extra damage on those said routing units, but Bretonnian support crumbles pretty quickly. I mean, the Knights Errant are not really world beaters by any means. The lowest tier of the Bretonnian Knights, mostly just here for extra mass. The real power units are fighting right here with King Lewin and his Grail Knights. Absolutely smashing up these Centigors. Yeah, the Centigors are throwing axes. Absolutely not cut out for this. Definitely would want Centigors of Tzeentch for this kind of a melee engagement, but curiously, not any. I mean, I do respect it to a degree, not just going for the full Centigor spam. Only taking the throwing axes here, but let's see how it plays out. Grail Knights and the Pegasus Knights working very well right now together to just take out these isolated skirmish units. Some of the Knights Errant also coming back. More Grail Knights there as well. So mobility advantage definitely on Bretonnia's side, and if we take a wide look at the battlefield here, one thing the Beastmen is going to have a big problem with is their units are super spread out right now. They really need to, I mean, chasing these routing units would be somewhat helpful, but at the same time, you don't want to leave units out to dry as much as possible and just lose out free value. So, you know, keeping these units, trying to group up your infantry here, not that you want to overblob, but at least stay in support range of each other. Right now you've got quite a few units pretty far afield here, and with Bretonnia having a decisive mobility advantage, that is going to come back to haunt the Beastmen, certainly, I would imagine. But at the same time, Beastmen are doing some pretty good damage, and like this situation here where the Centigors can kite the Knights, throw some axes at them, get some good value on some high-value units. Fortunately, one unit does get caught there by the Grail Knights and just absolutely smashed. Lewin, of course, also pretty fast, can help in this endeavor. But yeah, the reserve Destroyers of Drakwald now being revealed at this late game. Reasonably good HP. Yeah, they've got poison damage. Very solid stats overall. I mean, 32 attack, 47 defense. I think a lot of people kind of sleep on how good Ungor's stats actually are. Probably one of the best low-tier units in the game. The spears, at least. I don't know. Hand weapon Ungors are really not amazing, but the spears and the raiders are some of my favorite low-tier units in the game, certainly. But these raiders here are getting charged by the Grail Knights. Their spearmen bros coming to help. But of course, the best they can do is just kind of respond. They can't really actively defend nearly as well. You have some Pestigors have more of an active defense coming in, throwing some axes, and I think even using their mass, yeah, to charge the Grail Knights a little bit, hold them in melee somewhat, which is not a terrible play, although it is risky. Yeah, Lewin here a little bit isolated, but of course has the speed mass to just pretend like the infantry's not there for the most part. We do see one spawn summon coming out here. Might have lost track if the other one came out a little bit earlier, but let's see. You can always check the... It still has one use there of the Stave of Corruption, so saving one spawn summon maybe for a late game situation when he can get a trap on Lewin. Right now the bounce power is pretty significantly against Bretonnia, despite them having that mobility advantage. Value-wise, there's just a lot more left for the Beastmen on the field, and especially with that spawn summon, that'll put a big power spike in the balance of power. But yeah, Pestigors here counteracting those Grail Knights might actually be just enough to finish them off as the Spearmen herd move in as support, felling a few more of those Knights, dragging them down as they're so low on HP. They've been so badly beat up. They still managed to rout the Pestigors though, but definitely being punished by those lowly Ungor Spearmen. Absolutely fantastic. Of course, the Pestigors also, with a little bit of poison, will help, but the one thing about Grail Knights is because they're perfect vigor, they're not going to get slowed in the late game in the same way other cavalry would, right? Because that vigor maintains their speed at 100%, unlike, say, like an Empire Knight Reichsguard, you know. Griffin Legion in a similar situation would definitely be struggling now to get away from the Pestigors, whereas the Grail Knights 100% 84 speed, and it is really 84 speed. Yeah, absolutely blazing fast, can get away from those Pestigors no problem. Speaking of speed here, Pegasus Knight's also been doing a great job of avoiding dangerous engagements for the most part, but eventually he's going to have to fight the Pestigors in melee at some point. That's definitely the most threatening portion of the army right here. Like this, Pestigors once again being used to mass block, and Pestigors now getting some solid hits as the Pegasus Knights try and pull away. It doesn't take much. Pegasus Knights are pretty flimsy, and pretty soon they take enough damage where they are going to be mostly combat ineffective. Yeah, I think they actually shatter. No, they're still fighting, still haven't routed technically, but leadership's definitely not doing good. And like I said, very, very serious damage there. So, oh, a nice Dwellers below here from the Life Caster. The Damsel throwing out some damage. A big old AoE here. Pretty solid. It's good to have the option, certainly, if you're caught in a situation like this where you're facing a massive infantry especially. Have those AoE damage spells. Life has some that are serviceable. I mean, Dweller's certainly not as broken as it has been in the past, but gets the job done. Lewin gonna drop down, just take an absolute chunk out of these units here, trying to get a terror route going. A lot of these Beastmen units are pretty low on leadership, and critically those Pestigors as well. Their mass will no longer be able to help here. Rail Knights, Spearmen, all looking good. So, let's see. Yeah, Pegasus Knight's going to try and chase off those Pestigors. Perhaps we'll fast forward a little bit through this late game. Now the Beastmen got all their units together. They're making a proper stand against enemy mobility. According to tournament rule sets, I don't think you necessarily have to attack. You technically can just sit here and defend. He doesn't have to pursue mobility units that he can't catch. But on the other side, as long as the Bretonian player has multi-model units, he can, you know, cycle charge, and he technically, as long as he's attacking with something, it counts. And so he's going to send his peasant mob forward here to be attacking. Technically, the Pegasus Knights are also running in some charges here. But, yeah. Eventually, the Beastmen player's going to maneuver his formation somewhat to try and neutralize the remaining multi-model units here for Bretonnia. But eventually, it's just going to be a lot. With Lewin dropping in, Sword of Corone debuffing all of these Beastmen units, and the Knights getting effective cycle charges in and out. We've got a handful of infantry here, providing a little bit of stability as well. And you can see he's very patiently feeding one infantry at a time, rather than rushing them all in and having a mass leadership route. Keeps, you know, as according to the rules, he needs to keep one multi-model unit engaged, right? So he gets the one, sends it in, gets the next one, sends it in. Like I said, very patient, very smart play. Making sure he doesn't have any of these engagements start to turn against him, right? Because if you leave these shock units in for too long, RNG often can turn against them. Even Lewin here is getting pretty close to his healing cap. Morgrove's not a pushover in terms of combat. Definitely want to try and kill him on army losses and leadership. So, best thing to do is just try and finish off these Pestigors here. But the one unit of Grail Knights still with like 5,000 HP. That's a pretty big mountain to climb for the Beastmen at this point. So we'll continue fast-forwarding as the inevitable cycle charging end. Yeah, again, multi-model units attacking here. These Pegasus Knights chasing these routing units fulfills that rule. Forget the specifics of it, but honestly, it's why Conquest was invented, so that I don't need to remember specifics of it. Ooh, nice late-game spawn summon here from the Beastmen, though. That is going to somewhat change things. But again, even with the spawns, that perfect vigor of the Grail Knights, they don't care about the spawns. Poison, they can kind of bypass the spawns mass to a large degree. I think the spawns really were summoned in here to try and maybe finish off Lewin and win on leadership, which is certainly a play. It's kind of the only thing the Beastmen have left, so hard to criticize too much. But I think, honestly, just having more mass in this build, like, ultimately, you know, Babarat here kind of put himself behind the 8-ball a little bit. I mean, the Centaurs and Throwing Axes, not that they did bad, they were just a little bit overmatched. And, like, a lot of these units, it's not necessarily that they did bad, per se, but it's just that I think other units definitely would have been good to mix in here, especially even just, like, an extra spawn or two, or some regular melee Centaurs even, not even necessarily the armor-piercing ones. If you want to go cheap, you know, just something with some mass and mobility to be able to respond. And like we saw there, how even the Centaurs with Throwing Axes, who are not necessarily dedicated melee units, supported by the spears, in many cases were able to do very well against the Bretonnian Knights. So, yeah, I mean, I think just a little bit more mass in this Beastman build. It's a pretty interesting matchup overall. And Rinzler, like I said in the late game there, played very well, didn't overblob in his units at the end game like many players often will, just, you know, tactically using them efficiently. The really efficient use of the Pegasus Knights, too. 359 kills, 1,500 damage, gold value, 18,000 damage dealt. Super efficient for a unit in this cost range. And then, of course, the Grail Knights we expect to carry a ton of value, but really nice use of the Pegasus Knights. As a big fan of this unit, I have to say, I'm a big fan of that performance as well. Great job to Rinzler. Yeah, the Knights Errant kind of glorified roadblocks here, but they did their job. Some of the men-at-arms traded okay, but for the most part, they all did their jobs of dying cost efficiently. Damsel of Life also contributes a little bit of value there as well. But, yeah, interesting game. Actually ended up being pretty close there at the end, despite everything. But Bretonnia is definitely a very scary faction. Yeah, I mean, again, for this Beastman build, it'd be interesting to kind of think about, like, what would I actually cut here? Value-wise, even though the Blackhorns Ravagers got less value, I don't know, the Zangors and these guys, that maybe be the first avenue I'd look at. Cut these two and maybe take a couple of non-AP Centaurs in their place. I don't know if the cost lines up exactly. I guess we could check that real quick. But something to that effect. But just to mix in, like, literally one or two more mass units, mobility units. And speaking of mass and mobility units, Beastmen all the way up the top here. Yeah, so what is it? 650, 750. I mean, that's right within the cost range. The two of them, especially two of them together, is equal, right, to just two regular melee Centaurs. I think they'd be better off just going with that, honestly. Like these two, you know, at fighting infantry, these guys can do just as well at fighting pretty much all Bretonnian infantry as long as you keep them charging. Then they have, again, the mass mobility to try and protect those other units. Spawns are an interesting case. I don't see spawns a ton these days actually brought, but at 950, they have some stuff going for them. Decent mass. The poison, their damage and overall stats are not that great, though, and their armor and defensive stats especially means they can die in certain circumstances really fast without getting their value back. But 950, I mean, the poison and the mass, really, if you have other units that can get the damage done, mixing in even, like, you know, one or two of them, just to kind of act as, again, roadblocks in your formation, definitely can help out. Of course, Morgar there we saw. I didn't get to see the value on the spawns he brought to the battlefield, but of course, if you do something like 2 spawns plus Morgar, that gives you access to a decent amount without really having to dedicate a huge amount of resources in your build to it, right? So it's definitely an interesting matchup. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. If you like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.